I love Panasonic as a camera brand. I like their approach to business. I found them to be the best bang for buck camera system out there, and I like the fantastic amount of features and customization built into their cameras. But after all these years of waiting for certain specific problems to be fixed, I'm tired of waiting and I'm done. As many of you know, earlier this year when searching for America's rarest bird, I dropped my camera off a cliff in the backcountry and have needed to get it replaced ever since. But for about 2 years, I've been about ready to switch camera brands anyways, as there have been certain problems I've been having with Panasonic Lumix that I simply am tired of having my hopes up waiting to be fixed. So with my main gear being destroyed anyways, it was simply the final push towards switching camera brands that I've already been wanting to do. Throughout the course of this process, I've tested out multiple camera brands and multiple models to determine which camera brand would be best for me to switch to. Through this experience, I've learned a lot more about each camera brand's strengths and where they fall short in the current year of 2025. And this is why I created that video, to hopefully share with you all the pros and cons that I experienced along the way. This is not a gear review video. Rather, this is a video ultimately explaining why I'm leaving Panasonic and my thought process on why I'm switching to Sony. Hopefully, this will help you evaluate which camera brand is best for you if you are in the market for a switch. So to start off, let me mention that I spent time testing out the new Panasonic S1RII, Nikon Z8, Canon R1, and Sony A1II, all of which are flagships in their respective brands, and all in preparation for which camera brand I would switch to. I'll talk about my experience with each throughout this video, starting with the Panasonic S1RII. Now, the Panasonic S1RII was appealing in that I'd be keeping the same familiar system I've been using for years, with the additional bonus that it was by far the most affordable of any of the cameras I was looking to purchase. But to explain why I didn't like it, let's back up to why I've been frustrated with Panasonic in the first place. For years, Panasonic has been a great camera brand that includes incredible features at lower price points than any of the competition. However, amongst a few smaller ones, there is a huge gripe about their system: the autofocus. Ultimately, I was hoping that the Panasonic S1RII would be a leap forward in bird and animal detection autofocus, since it had been years since a flagship release. And while it was improved from the S5 II, I would argue only marginally. This lack of a substantial upgrade signaled to me that Panasonic will continue to not put priority on wildlife photographers and their intensive autofocus needs, as I had waited 2 years to see this camera upgrade and it had failed to live up to even my reasonable expectations of improvement. But beyond this, there are a couple of other aspects that are still lacking in the Panasonic S1RII as a flagship. Mostly, compared to all the competition flagships, it lacks a stacked sensor, making readout speed slow for video and keeping the burst rates at a lower rate. While other cameras are hitting marks 20 and up, the Panasonic S1RII caps at 9 FPS mechanical, and that's only an autofocus single. This combination of not being well equipped for fast action video and not having great burst rates was a big downside. All this to say that, if I'm honest, the Panasonic S1RII is not a bad camera for the price point. But with my profession being in wildlife photography, I'm in search of a flagship camera that is amongst the best out there, not simply good for the price point. Now, when it comes to Canon, it was between the R5 II and the R1, depending on what way I would like to go. The R1 performs phenomenal with burst rates and insane buffer. And most of all, in low light, it has great performance, while the R5 II has a higher megapixel count. For me, I used to think that resolution was all the rage, but as the years have gone on, I've come to realize that more often than not, the super telephoto lenses we use can't even hold up in 50 megapixel cropping. So personally, I'd rather take the great low light performance. This, amongst other features, led me to consider the R1 primarily. However, this consideration was quickly taken off the table again. In my experience with its autofocus, while it significantly outperformed the Panasonic, it was worse than the Nikon and Sony flagships, in wildlife photography specifically. I can't speak for other genres of photography, but with wildlife, it seemed to fall a little short on being able to detect animal bodies and eyes quite as well. But honestly, the autofocus would have been good enough for me, if the bigger factor wasn't at play. This factor was lens selection. Canon has always done this weird thing where they have some lower priced lenses that will get you by, then they have extremely high priced lenses that are phenomenal, but they cost an arm and a leg. Personally, I'm looking for a super telephoto lens in the $4,000 to $8,000 budget range, and Canon simply doesn't offer that. On the lower end, the 200 to 800 and 100 to 500 are okay, but high minimum apertures keep me from liking them. And the 200 to 800 is less than ideal sharpness for my level of image quality that I like. On the higher end, their super telephoto primes are fantastic lenses, but their price points of $12,000 and up keep them out of my budget reach. So ultimately, no matter how much I liked the R1, it was never going to work due to Canon's poor high/mid-tier super telephoto lens selection. Now, in just a moment, we'll get back to my thought process between the Nikon and the Sony. But first, I wanted to introduce the sponsor of this video, PGYTECH. In the process of switching camera brands, I knew that one thing I was 100% going to be doing was to upgrade my super telephoto lens to a better and bigger size. This meant that my beloved camera backpack I've been using for years would no longer fit my gear well, and it would be time for an upgrade. For the past 4 years, I've been using the PGYTECH's OnePro backpack and absolutely loved it. The backpack's layout is phenomenal, and it's built rugged, durable, and has protected my gear in rainstorms and being thrashed around. And that's why when PGYTECH reached out this past month about a new camera backpack they were designing specifically for huge super telephoto primes, it was a no-brainer that I was interested. PGYTECH's new OnePro ST backpack is built to deliver rugged utility, all-day comfort, and professional-grade protection of your expensive gear. Designed to house super telephoto primes between 600 and 1,200 millimeters, its main compartment contains one big housing to securely package it in with a camera body attached. In this main compartment are also 2 accessible compartments for smaller lenses or accessories. Originally, before receiving the backpack in person, I was worried that there would be little storage space beyond the super telephoto lens. But beyond this main secure housing department, the storage space is quite incredible. Both side pockets contain a plethora of space for batteries, cables, microphones, gloves, and so much more. There is also a top pocket on the inside and outside of the main compartment that gives more room to fit accessories in. Even considering that I'll be fitting much bigger lenses in this backpack, I find myself having even more room than my previous bag to fit accessories and more. But all this matters so little if not for its build and durability. And I'm happy to say that just like the previous backpack I've owned, it's largely made out of the same materials, which are rip-safe, water-resistant, and almost a hard shell type exterior that flexes and bends. On a more shallow note, I absolutely love the look and design of this backpack with its olivine camo pattern, and the rain cover it comes with offers an autumn leaf camouflage that can give variety if you have camouflage needs in the field. All this to say, I'm super excited about switching my main backpack to this setup, and I can't wait to start using it in the field this upcoming month on some of my special wildlife photography adventures I have planned. If you're interested in purchasing this camera backpack for yourself, check out the link in the description below to receive 10% off your purchase. Now we get down to the real competition, the Nikon Z8 versus the Sony A1II. This was the debate that I had going on back and forth for months in the process of deciding which camera would be best to go for. And man, was I impressed. Now, coming from Panasonic, the wildlife detection autofocus was absolutely phenomenal. Even compared to my last attempts with the Sony A1, not the Mark II, the A1II blew it out of the water. When the Sony A1 was released, I was never really happy with that autofocus, and honestly, still felt a little bit underwhelmed. With the Sony A1II, the autofocus was miles better in bird detect and picked up my subject the high majority of the time in a variety of scenarios. When speaking of the autofocus on the Z8, I was equally impressed. Apparently, in my talks with multiple Nikon Z8 shooters, the autofocus has drastically improved through firmware updates from the time of its release until its current version. I personally never tested it in its early days, but apparently it was pretty subpar. Now, its ability to track wildlife static or in flight was honestly mind-blowing. And this is where the Nikon had a slight hand up. While both the A1II and Z8 were probably around 80 to 85% hit rates, I noticed that the A1II struggled ever slightly more with the foreground elements. It was marginal, but if I had to decide a winner, it seemed as if the Nikon Z8 was taking it for the win in autofocus. Beyond autofocus though, the Sony seemed to take the lead in other important matters. The Sony A1II has some incredible video specs that, while not perfect, do outshine that of the Nikon Z8. Also, in low light, the Sony A1II seemed to take the lead a bit over the Z8. And finally, the image stabilization built into the A1II is an insane 8.5 stops of IBIS compared to only 5.5 on the Z8. In photography, I'd argue either of these IBIS amounts are great, but in video, 8.5 would come in handy. These are amongst the most important factors I personally consider besides autofocus, so it was worth taking into account with my purchase of Sony or Nikon. However, the Nikon Z8 was priced decently cheaper, and if we're getting picky, I'm still not a fan of Sony camera body ergonomics. They've improved drastically over the years, but it still doesn't have the same meat that I like in a camera body as what I like in other camera brands. Also, another pro for Nikon is that they've been doing some really great firmware updates across the board over the past few years. This means the camera only gets better over time, whereas Sony is known for their poor consumer care in the firmware field. But both cameras have great sensor readout speeds that are pretty much indistinguishable, and both cameras have great burst rates that are probably more than I will use. At the end of the day, both camera brands were honestly neck and neck between these two flagships. Nikon had the slightly better autofocus, Sony had slightly better low light and video specs, and it was really seeming like it was going to be settling into the Nikon. Until I considered one last factor a little deeper: lens selection. Nikon's lens selection for wildlife photography is absolutely phenomenal. Along the similar vein of the Canon lens selection that I mentioned before, I need a super telephoto that is in the mid to high tier range. And Nikon offers just that. Their Phase Fresnel series lenses have been amazing ways to save thousands of dollars while still getting some phenomenally sharp and low aperture lenses. In particular, the 400 4.5 and the 800 6.3 are amazing value for the price. And when testing out the 800 6.3, I was super happy with my results. I could crop in with the Z8's high megapixel sensor and not feel guilty, and my wallet wasn't broken with its price tag being around $5,000 compared to the $12K plus for Canon super telephoto primes. For zooms, their 100 to 400 was also really sharp of an option. Though not as low of an aperture, but this would only be a lens for certain specific use cases anyways. Nikon had impressed me with their lens lineup. And after weeks of considering this as the final push towards me switching to Nikon, I considered one last perspective. As a creator, I create wildlife films as my primary passion and source of income. In these films, I found the ability to take a tight close-up shot of wildlife, then immediately back out to show a wider shot as incredibly crucial part of my storytelling experience. This means that while a super telephoto prime lens would be phenomenal for my wildlife photography, as a wildlife videographer, it might not be the right option for me. When it came to Nikon, yes, they have the 100 to 400, but it doesn't quite have the reach I want it to, nor the low enough aperture. Nikon also has the 180 to 600, but for my level of image quality I desire, it once again falls short of my standards. For all of Nikon's amazing super telephoto primes, this left me without a great super telephoto zoom that would really do the job I needed it to. So I turned once again to consider Sony. Now, Sony's native lens selection for wildlife photography is nothing to brag about. Once again, unless you spend money on their $12,000 plus primes, the lower end stuff is nothing to go gaga over. The 200 to 600 is slightly better competitor than the 180 to 600 from Nikon, but it doesn't make waves, and again, wasn't enough for what I wanted. The 400 to 800 is a step in the right direction, but again, it's subpar image quality for my standards of where I wanted to go, and its higher minimum aperture didn't excite me neither. And neither did I feel like it was enough to pull me over to the Sony system. But that's where Sigma came in. Sigma recently just announced the 300 to 600 f4 super telephoto lens for L mount and E mount. This dream lens comes in around $6,500 and is the sharpest super telephoto zoom on the market currently. And not only that, but it's a 600 f4, meaning it would result in creamier images than any of the other zoom lenses by a landslide. Having a near high-end super telephoto prime quality on a zoom lens was absolutely the right decision for me as a wildlife photographer and videographer. And this lens would be a perfect match for my creative needs. Sigma's lens also comes with some great image stabilization, a great form factor, and more, making it the complete package for me. So that brings us to now. While Nikon seemed to be an ever so slightly better system for wildlife photography as of mid-2025, Sony just barely won me over because they were neck and neck, but more importantly, actually because of the Sigma lens. I guess it just goes to show how important investing into good glass actually is, and how, at the end of the day, the camera will ever only be as good as the lens in front of it. I'm sad to be taking a step back from Panasonic, as there's still a lot of stuff I like about them. But ultimately, they simply needed a true flagship model that would compete. And after 5 years of waiting from my S1R to S1R2, they've just been outpaced by the competition. I'm looking forward to getting to use more Sigma gear on my Sony system moving forward, and I'll be bringing you content with it in the coming next year. I've already bought my Sony A1II, and I'm currently in process of getting my hands on the Sigma 300-600 f4 for keeps while Sigma has me a loaner. I do have one more video I made back before my gear breakage in May that will be releasing with Panasonic gear. So you'll see me use that stuff one last time as a homage to the past. I hope this video was helpful in understanding why I chose the path I did, and I hope it helps some of you in your decision process as well. If I was to give an incredibly quick summary of which camera brands are best for which level of photographer, I'd say this. OM Systems, Canon, and Panasonic are all great options for lower budget wildlife photographers. However, with OM Systems and Panasonic, currently there's a cap for how high in image quality and camera lens performance you can go. So this is something to be aware of. You can foresee yourself investing into higher budgets in the future. With Canon, there's an extreme jump from their budget to high-end quality gear, so you'll have to keep that in mind as well. Once you reach closer to the mid-tier, Sony and Nikon truly do shine much more, with Sony taking more of the win around the $4,000 to $6,000 setups, and Nikon taking the win more around $7,000 to $10,000 complete setups. Once you get into the 10K plus range, honestly, Sony, Nikon, and Canon systems all have some fantastic options, and I'd say they're all really neck and neck in different ways. But Nikon just may be my very favorite. If you'd like to purchase any of the gear I mentioned, I'd appreciate if you use my affiliate links that I left in the description below. It doesn't cost you any extra, but I make a small affiliate revenue as a thank you if you found this info valuable and for the work I put into these videos. I can't wait to show you all my new gear, and I'll see you next time with some new Sony and Sigma camera gear.